All right, well, welcome everyone. Welcome to the Genetic Testing Information webinar. My name is Dara Dalmata. I'm the Chief Development and Communications Officer here at the Carroll Center for the Blind, and we're thankful that you joined us today. We're thrilled to offer this event for the Carroll Center community, thanks to support from Ascidian Therapeutics. Ascidian has been a dedicated Carroll Center partner in so many ways, including serving as a sponsor of our annual Walk for Independence, providing a summer internship to one of our Real World of Work experience students, as well as underwriting multiple event series like these for those living with vision loss. So thank you, Ascidian. Before I introduce our first speaker, I wanted to share a few housekeeping items with you. First, today's presentations will be recorded and shared after the event. So if you missed anything or want to revisit or share it with someone else, you will have that option. Second, we ask that you remain muted for the entire session to ensure the best experience for all. And finally, Q&A will be at the end of the webinar for all presenters. But feel free to enter your questions in the chat box throughout the webinar, and we can compile them for the end. For those using for those attending using JAWS, the command is Alt-H. So it is now my pleasure to introduce Sarah DiSalvatore, Vice President of Clinical Operations at Ascidian Therapeutics. Sarah will be sharing valuable information around the importance of genetic testing. Sarah?
Oh, thank you so much, Dara. And it's really a pleasure to be here to speak for a few moments about not only the importance of genetic testing, but really what it could mean for you down the road. And I'll share some personal experience that I have as well. And thank you to the Carroll Center, because I know we've had a very strong partnership over the last few years between Ascidian and the Carroll Center. So I've been at Ascidian for 2 years. I've been able to see amazing progress with our lead candidate for the treatment of Stargardt disease. So gene editing and the work that we're doing is extremely exciting, because there's very little out there in terms of actually editing the genes, putting a large genetic mutation into a capsid and being able to really target specific exons within a mutation. So what we've been, I'm responsible for managing the clinical studies and to ensure patients are enrolled in the trial, that all safety measures are taken, and lead an excellent team here that partners with all of our investigators and sites and multiple vendors. So we are very early on, before we really even consider a patient eligible for our study, we do look to see that they have the accurate diagnosis and prognosis. So this would include confirming the clinical suspicion that eye diseases share similar symptoms, but sometimes the clinical diagnosis is challenging. So receiving the actual genetic testing can definitively identify the underlying genetic cause and obviously lead to a more accurate diagnosis. It also helps the patients, the caregivers, and the physicians to understand the disease progression. So knowing exactly which specific gene mutation you have can provide insights into the course and the severity of the eye disease, but also aid in prognosis and really management planning. And it can also identify eye conditions that are part of a broader genetic syndrome affecting other parts of the body. Genetic testing can help identify these syndromes, which again can lead to more comprehensive care. So perhaps there's multiple genetic mutations in addition to an IRD mutation, which can then aid in a more comprehensive clinical plan. We also, I think what's so important now, and I'll give just this brief story. I started to develop macular degeneration, and it is hereditary in my family. Multiple people have it. So I saw a retina specialist, And I spoke with our CMO at the time here, Chief Medical Officer at Acidian, and I said, do you think I should get the IRD panel? And he said, absolutely, because if you do have something, there are so many treatments targeted for that exact genetic mutation. So I went ahead and did the IRD panel, and now I'm searching for potential treatments for what came up on my panel. So really, what's so important, and I think just we're very lucky to have this day and age, are tailored therapies. And like I had mentioned earlier, just our current trial for Stargardt's is really targeting an ACB4, ABCA4 genetic mutation in certain parts of the exon. So genetic testing, obviously very crucial for identifying these patients who may really benefit from our treatment. In the future, we could look for predicting treatment response, which you'll see how some individuals respond to different conventional therapies, which will allow for more personal approaches. And again, another personal story on this, I have a daughter and she's on medication for something, and they were able to do genetic testing on her and decide the output decided for us which medications she would respond to and which she wouldn't. And she was on something she would not respond to. So right away, we went and made that change to put her on something that, based on her specific genetics, she would respond to. And then I think what's also important and something to really think about when it comes to genetic testing is family planning and risk assessment, either identifying carriers. And I know in many of the inherited retinal diseases, there are carriers, and there is the risk of carrying down the gene to family members. And if you are thinking about having a family and you have a rare genetic disease, identifying what the gene is so helpful. Again, personally, had something come up with a family member. They were diagnosed with something, and I said, oh, I need to know, because let me see if there's a gene for it that could be passed down to my children. And so down the road, I was hopeful that there could be targeted therapy for whichever gene mutation came up on this family member. And it can also identify other at-risk relatives that can undergo testing to see what their likelihood of developing the condition is. Not everybody's open to that. That's understandable, but it just allows for proactive monitoring and early intervention if it's necessary. And now in some cases, I've been following this space for a while now, is prenatal diagnoses. Some cases, genetic testing can be performed prenatally to determine if a fetus not only has an inherited genetic eye condition, but some other rare genetic conditions as well. I'm so excited to see how that space really continues to develop and move with prenatal testing. And now what's important for us and for you as well is really facilitating research and clinical trials, because we cannot try to help patients with rare genetic diseases unless we know the exact genetic mutation. So for us, it's essential for identifying individuals with these specific mutations who would be able to participate. I'll just use our study as an example, as a novel gene therapy that could potentially really help patients with Stargardt's disease. And then advancing the scientific understanding. So studying the genetic basis of eye diseases through genetic testing really contributes to a deeper understanding of the disease mechanisms, which could then help the development of new treatments and diagnostic tools. And I think that diagnostic tools are so important because in the end, it can become a regulatory endpoint. So it could be a really important endpoint for an approval of one of these gene therapy treatments. And I also, again, I'm speaking personally, and I'll share a story at the end. This is my kind of last bucket of why I feel that gene therapy is important, and our company as well, very involved and motivated in ensuring all of our patients have the IRD panels collected at the beginning of our studies. It really ends the diagnostic odyssey. So for individuals and families that have experienced a long and uncertain diagnostic journey, genetic testing provides the definitive answer, which really can be emotionally relieving to yourself, your family, caregivers, and then becoming empowered through this knowledge. Understanding the basis of an eye condition can empower individuals and families to learn more about this disease, connect with support groups, and make really informed decisions about their health and the future. And with that, I'll share why I'm an anomaly to Ascidian is because I not only work in the field, but I do have a 11-year-old daughter who was diagnosed with a rare genetic condition, and we were on our odyssey for many years, probably 6-7 years. And I was advocating and fighting. I wasn't going to give up until I knew what she had. And I had to call CHOP, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and say, can you please meet with us in the genetics department? And they ran whole genome sequencing on my daughter. It took 3 months. And we ended up finding out that, and here, with what I do, I already had in my mind what I thought she had. So when they called me, I said, oh, she has this. And they said, no, she has DDX3X. And it's a mutation on the X chromosome. So it affects mostly girls. And every symptom, medical issue, delays that she had, it really fit in this category. And I was so grateful because now I sit on the leadership team of the DDX3X Foundation. I'm an advocate. I follow, again, going back to knowing that diagnosis, we're really hoping for drug development. So as a foundation, we are advocating and pushing for drug development. Now, I'm lucky in the sense that I have the background and I have the network. So from the parent side, I'm always advocating with different drug development companies. Now, the range of the disease, it ranges. My daughter has what's considered a mild version, but a lot of the girls her age can't walk or talk or use the bathroom. And so it's a spectrum of a disorder in terms of really where exactly this genetic mutation is. So I've been able to speak with genetic counselors to learn more, get my family involved. We will sometimes put support groups together through the foundation. We have a really active foundation, and that's really my second full-time job. But without having that specific genetic testing done, I would probably still be out there trying to figure out what she had and what the options are. Also, having this diagnosis has really empowered our foundation to put together centers of excellence around the country so that these children can be seen, let's say in San Francisco, that's a center of excellence, and they can all be treated with some type of standardized treatment or evaluation through neurology, speech pathology, orthopedics. So much is a component into this diagnosis and this disease. So again, having that support group and these centers of excellence, so we can really all focus on treating these children in a uniform way. So that's my story. Thank you so much for your time and for listening. And I hope I've inspired and encouraged anyone who is on the fence of really moving forward with genetic testing to go ahead and do it. Very personal decision, respect that, but can really, like I said, empower the knowledge and allow you to become connected with support groups and advocacy. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah, for that information as well as sharing your personal story. It really does put a perspective on why it's important and how it can help. I know I said Q&As at the end, but one quick question that I think might help clarify as we move forward, especially talking about additional topics, was to you used the term IRD panel. So I just want to clarify. Inherited retinal disease is what that acronym is, but I was just curious to what that panel entails it, because I know there's probably quite a few that have been diagnosed with an IRD, but is there specific diseases that are part of that panel? What does that entail?
There are, yeah, so it will come back with specific diseases. The reason why we always do a confirmatory inherited retinal disease panel is because there's new mutations that are coming up so often. But yeah, there is a whole list of, I can get you the information of almost every disease that it would capture, but it's like a list of about 40 different types of mutations. Even the one I had, it came back with, it was looking at a mutation in collagen that affects hearing. So there are so many of that, and I can certainly follow up and show you the exact panel that we use here at Acidity, and it's called Blueprint Genetics, similar to Invitae. They typically run all the same panel from the different vendors that offer that, but it's a very wide range of diagnoses.
Wonderful. Thank you for that clarification. So I would love now to welcome to the virtual stage Todd Durham. Todd is Senior Vice President, Clinical and Outcomes Research at Foundation Fighting Blindness. We're grateful to have Todd with us today, who will share information around how to access the genetic testing that Sarah referenced in her presentation, as well as to talk about Foundation Fighting Blindness's My Retina Tracker registry. So Todd, you want to take it from here?
Thanks, Dara. Appreciate that. And Sarah, appreciate your introductory comments and your experience too. So I was making notes as you were speaking. Hopefully, if I remember and look down in time, I will pick up on some of those comments that you made. So as Dara said, I'm with the Foundation Fighting Blindness, and many of you know that our mission is focused on driving research to lead to more treatments and cures for inherited retinal degenerations or diseases, the IRDs, and dry AMD or geographic atrophy. And we do that through a number of ways, largely through our grants program and our science program. So we award grants every year to scientists who are studying basic things like what are the molecular changes that are happening from the DNA all up to the cell to the systems. How do they manifest themselves in a person's vision and the impacts, and all the way through one of the programs that I manage is looking at what does disease progression look like for many of the inherited retinal diseases? How rapidly do they occur, and what are our best measurements to track their progress so that we can inform really good clinical trial design so that therapies are more likely to be successful once they're studied. But today I'd like to talk to you, as Dara mentioned, about another program I'm responsible for. I'm the principal investigator for a study that we do in-house here called My Retina Tracker Registry. And if you've been in the community for a while, you've probably heard of it. My Retina Tracker Registry started many, many years ago here at the Foundation as a mailing list. Many members of our community wanted to be kept abreast of the latest research news, opportunities they had to participate. And back then, 20, 30 years ago, there wasn't much really happening in clinical trials, but today there is. There are over 100 clinical trials that we track on our website for treatments of inherited retinal diseases and dry AMD and geographic atrophy. So today, My Retina Tracker Registry, which is a research study with oversight by an institutional review board. That means we have, before anyone signs up for our study, they are going to be presented with a very long informed consent document. This is a key part of proper research. That means as a research participant, you need to know what it is you're doing, what are the potential benefits, what are the potential risks, what might you gain from it, and what's expected of you. In our case, My Retina Tracker Registry is an online platform and database where people with inherited retinal diseases register with us, tell us a bit about their disease history, like their diagnostic odyssey that Sarah mentioned in her own personal story. When did they first experience symptoms, and what's their status today? We have a number of, we have a detailed patient-reported outcome measure that's been developed to really learn about general disease state, both physical health and mental health, which we know is very important for individuals with inherited retinal diseases. And the primary purpose today, even still, of My Retina Tracker Registry is to keep our community members up to date about research opportunities. And many people sign up with the hope that one day they'll hear about a clinical trial like what Sarah's company is pursuing for ABCA4 associated Stargardt disease. And we do have a number of occasions to do that when companies are conducting clinical trials and they ask for our support in recruiting. Then we can send out announcements on their behalf about this trial opportunity, because part of that informed consent is to say that we may contact you in the future about research opportunities and relevant research news for you. So folks, when they sign up in our study, are consenting to be contacted about future research opportunities. Yeah, I also think it's very important to say that this is a research study that we run. It's not used for fundraising efforts. Many people may be familiar with the foundation in other ways and have other connections with us, but we do not use My Retina Tracker Registry for any fundraising. So in 2017, the foundation just looked at possible ways to grow the size of My Retina Tracker Registry and make it more informative, and decided to add genetic testing to the overall program. And that was the start of My Retina Tracker genetic testing program, which is itself a study. So it's a study within a study. And the genetic testing program can be accessed even today by people who have an inherited retinal degenerations through their healthcare provider. So importantly, this is not a test that you can just obtain on your own from home. You really do need to involve a healthcare provider. It's a very important part, we believe, of the ongoing journey that you may have with an inherited retinal disease, but also in understanding the results, which can be very complicated and not so clear cut, and where you may need some further follow-up. So the My Retina Tracker genetic testing program is accessed through a healthcare provider, and this program is a collaboration between the foundation. Our clinical laboratory in the program now is Prevention Genetics, and Inform DNA, who is our partner for genetic counseling. We believe everybody who obtains a genetic test for inherited retinal degeneration should also receive genetic counseling, and we think the genetic counselor is a very key part of the healthcare team. So the program itself covers the cost for individuals who join the testing program and My Retina Tracker Registry. It covers the cost of the genetic test and the genetic counseling if it's referred outside to Inform DNA. And to date, we have the Foundation's program has tested and made available to people with inherited retinal disease. Over 28,000 people have benefited from this program to date. And what it means now is we have now a lot more information about the causes of an inherited retinal degenerations and how common are specific changes in the DNA for people who have inherited retinal disease. And this can inform companies who are developing new treatments. As Sarah mentioned before, one of the exciting aspects of science today is we're getting very specific about how treatments can work, even down to the specific kind of variant in your specific gene, not just the affected gene, but the specific variant itself. So it's very exciting. And the data we have available now, it offers us the ability then to identify people who have the precise change in their DNA who may be amenable to a new treatment that's being studied. And I think that's very exciting, and it certainly has been a great addition for us. So the other, while the program started back in 2017 to grow the registry and increase its value, I can't understate how important it is to address the barrier issues in the United States. So you can today, if you would like to have genetic testing, you can access it through your insurance if your insurance covers it. It's very hard to get good solid numbers on how many companies cover it. We think anecdotally, we've learned over the last year that about in 50% of cases, insurance would cover genetic testing. So how about the other 50%? Well, My Retina Tracker Registry is one option that would cost nothing to individuals who join our study. And there are other research opportunities out there and other sponsored programs besides ours. And many providers will already know about some of those as they are. So if you are someone who is interested in genetic testing through our program and willing to join My Retina Tracker Registry through the program, the pathway in is to speak with a healthcare provider. And the healthcare, we've already provided testing through hundreds of healthcare providers here in the United States, probably over 800 ordering providers. So this program was meant to address access geographically rather than insist that individuals live in large metropolitan areas where there might be specialist centers or academic centers. This test is widely available, and we're in contact with providers all over the country. So this is available only for individuals who live here in the United States. The other requirements are you have to have undergone a clinical exam, and your doctor needs to have made an initial diagnosis of an inherited retinal disease. So the funding for this program comes from philanthropic donations. And so we want to make sure that the money that comes in for the program is used effectively. So we ask that the providers do an initial diagnosis. As Sarah said, though, it's really going to be the genetic test result that's going to give you the most clear-cut answer. Even the most expert inherited retinal disease clinicians that I know can't get it right 100% of the time. So the clinical test, the diagnostic test, is an essential part of that diagnosis. The other thing is I would like to mention, sometimes the tests, the panels themselves, they do change over time, but they don't change all that often. The current panel we provide through our program has 110 genes on it. That it's a panel means there's really a number of genes in one single test. So you just need to provide one biologic sample. That could be saliva or blood. You provide one sample, and the single test will look at 110 genes. Sometimes the panels do change. Sometimes we may add some genes that we didn't originally cover. Sometimes we can take those away for different reasons. The current panel that we use now is based on our experience from the last 5 or 6 years. We used a larger panel from Blueprint Genetics at one time that had over 300 genes on it, but we found through our own analysis that we could save a significant amount of money by just restricting it down to 110 genes and still capture almost all of the cases that we could detect with the much larger panel. So the pathway in is through a healthcare provider. They will need to register themselves with the Foundation Fighting Blindness, so we know who our customers are, so to speak. And then your healthcare provider then will provide you with an informed consent document. A lot of paperwork, unfortunately. It's an informed consent document for My Retina Tracker Registry. It's a consent document for the genetic testing program. And it's a consent to be contacted by Informed DNA should you be referred to them for genetic counseling. And we have tried to make it as easy as possible. And we have staff here at the foundation who can answer questions if there are any hiccups along the way. When the results are available, your primary contact is still your healthcare provider. Foundation Fighting Blindness, none of us here in this program are clinicians, so we don't provide counseling or advice on it. You receive your results through a report from your healthcare provider, and we encourage you to follow up with a genetic counselor or your ordering provider with any questions. And since you will have consented to be part of our study, we also receive your genetic test results, and we use that for research purposes. We never share the identity of individuals participating in our research to anyone outside of my research team, which numbers 4 people. We take the privacy and confidentiality very seriously, just as with any research endeavor. And beyond that, the benefits to being part of My Retina Tracker Registry is now we know and you know more about your genetic diagnosis, and now you can raise your hand to participate in clinical trials and other research opportunities. And when we are asked, we can introduce you to those possibilities as well. And I'll just echo what Sarah said about the impact of programs like this. Getting a clear-cut answer makes a lot of difference in people's individual lives. Initially, there's a lot of fear and uncertainty just because of the question mark, what's causing this? How can I learn more? And getting the diagnostic answer available from a genetic test can really help answer that, begin to answer that, so you can now advocate for yourself. You can find research opportunities if there are trials available, and sometimes find community for people who have the same condition that you have. And many people find a lot of value in that. So I think that's all I have for my prepared comments today, but I thank you for your attention, and I'll pass it back over to Dara.
Great. Thank you so much, Todd. We're really grateful for your insights, and it's such great resources that you guys have. So I'm sure everyone took a lot away from your presentation. So before we get on to the Q&A session, I would like to introduce our final speakers. Amber Trzak, who works in patient advocacy and engagement at Ascidian Therapeutics, and Michelle Georges, who will provide our patient perspective this afternoon. So welcome, Amber and Michelle, and thank you for your time today with us.
Thank you, Dara. And I'm so excited to introduce Michelle and have us all learn a little bit more from her personal experience. Again, just echoing and kind of sending this point home, the value and importance of getting a genetic test has multiple benefits across, the diagnostic journey of somebody that has experienced vision loss, and can help just in a multitude of ways. And so Michelle's going to speak to her personal experience, just to kind of share even more information on how she specifically benefited, as well as some of her family members. So Michelle, thank you for sharing your story with us today. I'm very excited to learn a little bit more. But so why don't you just kind of kick it off and share with me your journey through vision loss that ultimately ended up in you pursuing a genetic test.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here and to share my story. And I think my story starts about 22-ish years ago. I was about 9 years old, and I had just moved to the US from Lebanon, which is in the Middle East. And, I was new to this area. My family had just moved here, and, I had some glasses. I had been going to my optometrist. I had just like my general reading glasses, as many kids do. And I started to notice, or I should say, my mom started to notice some very interesting things going on with my vision. We had a really long pathway that led to our driveway, and at the end of the driveway was just a little step. And almost every single time I was, running around, jumping around, walking towards that step, I would trip. And my mom, I was a little bit of a rowdy kid. So my mom was like, all right, she's not paying attention. She's not focused. She's running too quick, whatever. And so she would tell me, focus, pay attention, make sure you're looking where you walk. I'd say, okay, mom, sounds good. And then she started to notice that even when I was walking calmly, holding her hand, looking right at the step, seemingly, I would still trip. And then she started to notice it was only happening at night. And so she said, all right, I'm going crazy here, but I can't ignore this. So she took me to my optometrist, and she said, I'm going to sound nuts. Don't think I'm crazy, but here's what I'm noticing. And I don't know what's going on. Maybe she needs a new prescription. Now, thankfully, at the time, I had a wonderful optometrist who did not ignore my mom as a crazy person and said, all right, well, let's look into this. Let's see what's going on. She ran some tests, saw some strange things going on, ran some more tests, and said, "All right, I am not an expert in this, but I'm having a gut feeling. I think I know what's going on, and I want to refer you to a specialist. If I'm right, I'm going to be very shocked because this is very uncommon, especially for someone her age, but I'm just going to refer you." So from there, she referred me to a retinal specialist. At the time, 9 years old, it felt like 100 years later. All the tests in the world were run. And then my retinal specialist at the time sat me and my parents down and said, "All right, your daughter has an inherited retinal disorder, something called retinitis pigmentosa, RP for short." And from there, obviously, my life changed. I was now a person with a, degenerative vision impairment. And it was brand new. None of us had ever heard of it. None of us even knew what it was. And the doctor explained that this is something I was born with. It comes from my parents, their genes, but it's a recessive gene, so they don't have it. And she explained all that. Obviously, it went right over my head. I was 9. I had no clue what was going on. And all I thought was, great, a new set of glasses. And from there, I was referred to Mass Eye and Ear. And I just kept going. Every couple years I would go. I would, get all the tests all over again, sit there for the whole day. And, the doctors would track me and track my vision loss. And I started a drug therapy or, vitamin A, I should say. And they told my parents, okay, if she takes vitamin A daily and she takes fish oil and she eats fish and she does all this stuff, it should help slow it down. And my parents said, okay. And from there, we just hung tight. I would go back every 2 years, do everything all over again, and we would go from there. It wasn't until I was about, I think it was maybe around 18 or 19 years old, the doctors approached me and said, hey, would you be interested in participating in, what I've now learned is called a natural history study. We have all your data. All you have to do is consent to us using your data in the study. It's anonymous, and all we would need is just some blood work from you and your parents and immediate siblings. And I said, all right, sounds good, easy enough, simple. So my family and I, we did the blood test and we submitted the results. And then from there, I didn't really hear much else. And I just kept on living day to day, hoping that something would come up, but just going and staying in touch with the doctors.
Thank you. So it sounds like it was just an easy process, but you didn't necessarily get a lot of information from it that benefited you individually, correct?
At the time, no. It felt like I was just doing something good for the research world, which I mean, I loved, and I said, sure, why not? But really at the time, and they were very clear, to be fair to them, it was anonymous. We were just submitting data, and hopefully someone will learn something at some point.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like just from our past conversations, something interesting happened to you about 4 to 5 years down the road.
It
So do you want to speak to
did.
that? But tell us what happened in your early 20s?
Yes, absolutely. So, contrary to what I thought would happen, that genetic test actually ended up changing the game up a little bit for me and my family. And something I, hadn't mentioned before that I think is very important to the story. Growing up, I always felt like there was just something off about my diagnosis. Doctors, parents, teachers, whoever kind of knew what was going on, they would explain my symptoms in a way that just never really fit. They would say, well, RP causes this and this and this. And sometimes it was accurate and sometimes it just wasn't. It didn't feel like that was explaining my experience correctly. It felt like something was off. And I would try to get some answers and I try to say, guys, that doesn't sound right because you're telling me my peripherals are being impacted, but my central, I'm having a hard time with my central. Some people would dismiss me and say, no, you're wrong. And I was like, but these are my eyes. What do you mean? Like, no, that's not how it works. Some doctors, would try to say, oh, here's maybe an explanation, kind of makes sense, kind of doesn't, but maybe that'll do it. And I was like, okay, well, I'm not a doctor, so I can't really say much, but it just never fit. So after this genetic test around, 18, 19, again, I didn't hear much for about 4 to 5 years until maybe my early mid 20s, until I was told that apparently I have a different mutation of RP that causes different symptoms. And it's more prevalent in people with my ethnic background, in people from the Middle East. And it appears the symptoms present at a younger age. So suddenly, everything clicked. All of the weird things about me and my diagnosis that never really fit, it clicked. And it was because I have this very specific mutation of one specific gene that is still RP. It's not that I got a new diagnosis, but it just explained my diagnosis a little bit further. And I felt validated. For years I had been saying, something's not right. And then my doctor sits me down and says, well, all those times you said it didn't make sense? It didn't. And this is why. And I was like, finally. And so from there, it really opened up, my perspective on my own vision loss, my own diagnosis. And it made me understand what was going on in my eyes just a little bit more.
Wow, that must have been so empowering to finally hear that you were actually right, even though it's your
What?
vision and your eyes. Um, so could you please, Michelle, share with us, because I think that something that, a lot of folks are frustrated is just how long research takes and how there is no available treatment for most IRDs. And how do you, especially in your case, you had 4 to 5 years where you would go, twice a year or every 2 years. How do you stay motivated? How do you stay engaged? And how do you stay like just in generally hopeful?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to say the motivation that I feel now is definitely something I've come into as more of an adult who understands the process and understand what's going on. If you ask my parents, they would say I fought them every step of the way when I was a kid because it just felt tedious. I would go to my doctor every 2 years. And it truly just felt as though, I was getting the same answers time and time again. Okay, we've seen some vision loss, still nothing new. It's been 15 years, it's been 20 years, it's been X number of years. We're still working on it, hang tight. And as a kid, I didn't want to give up a full day and go to the doctors and get testing. Thankfully, I had parents who said, too bad, so sad, and ensured that I kept going. But when I got the results from that initial genetic testing or natural history test, I should say, it made me realize that even though it takes a really long time, eventually someone will figure something out. It's partially just faith in the system, partially in that feeling of validation I got, because if I hadn't continued going back and staying engaged, and staying active in the research and medical world, staying connected to my doctor, I probably would still be right now wondering why my version of RP doesn't really make sense and feeling like I'm not connecting to others who have RP the same way and my experiences aren't the same. Um, and finding out that full diagnosis, it made me approach my current services differently. It made me approach the techniques to help with my vision loss a little bit differently. And it gave us all a little bit of hope that something's going on. I mean, I believe Todd mentioned it earlier. For many years, there was really no progress, or seemingly there was no progress. And suddenly, in just the last maybe 10 or so years, we've seen a boom in research and progress and just a deeper understanding of what's going on. And that's because individuals like me decided it might not impact me, but sure, we can do, a blood panel. Sure, you can track my data. If I hadn't, and if others like me hadn't, it might have taken longer to figure out my different mutation, and it might have, you know, I might not have ever found that out. And that would have definitely impacted, I think, the way I approach my vision loss and just my journey overall.
That is such great insight, because I think that it's often challenging for folks to, especially on the research side of things, to think from the lens of a person going through this diagnostic journey. So thank you so much for highlighting that. Todd briefly mentioned this, that the My Retina Tracker registry can allow folks to be notified about the opportunities for clinical trials. Can you speak to your experience after having your genetic test completed? Did your physician ever speak with you with regard about enrolling in clinical trials or just research in general?
Yeah, absolutely. I think after getting, what I now reference as my second diagnosis, um, I think the conversation was very much reflexive moving forward past that point rather than just a one-way conversation with me and my doctor where I would show up, do tests, be told, XYZ, and then leave. It became more of a back and forth where I now better understood what types of questions to be asking. And my doctor then, began to see me as somebody who wanted that information and who was interested and open to it, and therefore shared more of the research. Up until that point, I think maybe because they thought I was young, maybe, I hadn't expressed any interest. I'm not sure, but the conversation would end as soon as I kind of got the results of the test that day. Now, every time I see my doctor, he asks, do you want to talk a little bit about any more, any latest updates in research? Are you interested in that? I was even approached to potentially participate in a study in a clinical trial for a drug therapy. I said, yes, I'm open to it. They did a test, and unfortunately, I did not qualify due to many factors I probably can't even explain or remember right now. But, it was definitely a conversation. And although I didn't qualify to participate myself, he now keeps me in the loop as that specific trial keeps going because that was something I had been connected to in some way, shape, or form. So it's definitely, kind of opened up my interest in the research aspect in the clinical trials. And it's definitely allowed me and my doctor, I think, to have more intentional and meaningful conversations about what's going on in the world of RP and vision loss as a whole.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you. When you first started sharing your journey, you touched upon that your siblings were also participating in the initial study. And I just would love to learn more about how your siblings experienced their journey, as well as, finding out how you have the more accurate diagnosis. And then having all been tested, what do you do with that? Or specifically, maybe your siblings, what do they do with those results moving forward?
Absolutely. When I was first diagnosed, the doctors said because there's a genetic component, we're going to run some tests for her siblings, but to my knowledge, I don't believe any of those were genetic tests. So they just ran vision tests, the peripheral studies, any of us know kind of those 1,000 tests you run when you go to the doctors. And it seemed as though my siblings weren't having any difficulty with their vision, and therefore, it just ended there with them at the time. When I was 18 and I did the blood work, again, we didn't get those results right away. But when I found out, 4 to 5 years later that I had this new version, I asked about my siblings and my parents, and they informed me that my siblings were in fact carriers. Now, at the time, my brother had just gotten married, and so I shared this information with him and said, listen, you do what you want, but this is what happens. You're a carrier. And you might want to consider talking to your wife and, having this conversation because as we know, if she's also a carrier, you now have a 25% chance of passing this on to your children. And that was knowledge that I didn't really understand until this genetic test. Now, he had a very different response. He said, it's fine. I don't want to. As Sarah mentioned earlier in the session, it's a very personal choice. And I respected it and I said, it's your call. Fast forward to when my sister's getting married, she now has the same information and she took a different path. She got every test under the sun. She tested her partner. They wanted all the information and they said, it doesn't mean it changes what we plan to do. It just changes our approach. And, if we know that there's a chance of passing this on to our children, as Sarah mentioned, there's, earlier intervention. There's a way for you to kind of manage those symptoms and see what can you do. Um, and so that was definitely a very interesting dynamic between those two people grew up in the same household. They approach that differently. for me, it was very important to know that my partner, my current husband, did not have this genetic mutation. It absolutely would have changed my plans and my approach to family planning, and he would have as well. So when I got engaged, he and I sat with a genetic counselor. We ran all the tests, and the genetic counselor kind of explained to us what that means and what our family planning, how, if any way, it would have been impacted, knowing both of our genetic breakdown. My parents, by the time I was diagnosed, they were older. They were carriers, but they knew they weren't going to get it. But now they don't send me as many articles because now they understand more what I have. So growing up, my mom used to send me articles of people, clinical trials, or people getting cured from something that I don't even have. And I'm like, what do I do with this information? Now she understands more what I have going on. She understands more what our family genes entail. And so it helps us all kind of understand and focus our attention on the actual research that will impact us rather than getting overwhelmed by all of the research and not really knowing what's going to help me or, where we are at in our journey.
And that's such a great point too. Thank you so much for highlighting that, Michelle. I think it's valuable to, you guys are now on the correct path for your
Mhm.
specific diagnosis as opposed to potentially, getting drowned in information. So I guess just to wrap this up, any thoughts just on the value or importance of genetic testing from your perspective?
Absolutely. I've had a very interesting history with genetic testing, but generally speaking, not much has changed for me in that sense. I mean, it's not that I have, now I have a cure or now, anything's changed for me in that sense. It didn't necessarily change my prognosis, but it absolutely changed my approach and my perspective. And for anyone who is maybe hesitant to approach it, the good news is you can go through the genetic testing process, and it doesn't mean you have to participate in a trial. It doesn't mean you have to, start a new drug therapy. I'm not sitting here telling you I'm going to be the first in line for the new cure. I might not be, but I think having knowledge is absolutely power. And it's personal power, it's, medical power. It's just power all around to understand and to kind of move forward in your journey just a little bit clearer. So it definitely does not force you to do anything. It definitely does not change your pathway or your approach to your journey. It can just give you a little bit of a different perspective. So I would encourage anyone who's maybe been on the fence or towing the line to really look into it and maybe just think through how this could impact you.
Thanks, Michelle.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you, Amber and Michelle. That was a wonderful, wonderful little panel you guys had and learned a lot. And hopefully a lot of people took a lot away from that. We do have one additional question in the chat at the moment. If anyone else has any questions, please enter them into the chat and I'm happy to address them to the panelists. But for right now, we have one for Todd. Todd, we have an attendee who had a MyRetina tracker diagnosis about 5 or 6 years ago, and as well as a counseling session, and he was just curious if that blood sample is saved. If so, can it be retested for further technologically more sophisticated analysis?
Yep, it's a good question, one we get quite a fair amount. So I think the short answer is yes, the lab saved those samples for a long time, not forever, for a long time. So technically there is the possibility to go back and re-examine those samples with different technology. The challenge can arise though, what exactly did you consent to at that time? Sometimes the consent is worded very specifically about a 300 and some gene panel or 110 gene panel. Suppose today we want to look outside of that, which is explicitly consented by you as a research participant. We would need at a minimum to go get another consent for you to re-examine your sample. So it is technically possible. A second part of this answer is it advisable? if you're during your testing journey, you got a clear-cut answer like Michelle did, that's great. That probably happens about 2/3 of the time with the commercially available panels that we use and others. If you got a clear-cut answer, there's no need to go back and find re-examine your sample. You got the answer and it won't change. But the other third of people fall into a number of different categories that don't necessarily have the same path forward. Sometimes you can have variations in your DNA that aren't picked up at all with the kinds of tests that we do through these commercially available panels, and you need to do more sophisticated techniques, maybe even whole genome sequencing, look at different structural variations, not typos or typographical errors in the DNA, but something having to do with the structure. And sometimes you need to look in the introns, whereas we tend to look in the exons, in the space just around the exons that are responsible for proteins. So this is re-emphasizing the point that the need for retesting, re-examining your sample is probably best done with a genetic counselor. The professional genetic counselors are going to stay on top of research advances and your particular instance in your case, and can answer a question about what happens next for you. And I just love, and at least for me to close, just love all of Michelle's stories, because she very nicely illustrated the value of genetic testing, both for herself and her family, which was great.
Great, thank you. We just had another question come in, just talking about asking what the first steps in registering for the Retina Tracker are.
Yeah, if you just want to register as a participant in my Retina Tracker registry, you can find, we have a website through Foundation Fighting Blindness called, if you just Google My Retina Tracker Registry, it will take you to a URL, and it has the opportunity for you to create an account for yourself, and that would be the first path forward. If you'd like to enter by way of getting a genetic test, that would be done through a healthcare provider, and through that healthcare provider relationship and participating in the genetic testing program, you would also be consenting at the same time to create an account profile for you automatically.
Great, thank you. It doesn't look like we have any more questions in the queue, but we will be receiving, as a reminder, we will be sending out the thank you email with the recording, as well as information on how to contact the presenters and registering, etc., for the registry. So that information will be forthcoming once the recording is updated. Just check one more time, but yep, no more questions. So I just want to thank our sponsor one more time, Ascidian Therapeutics, for making this session possible. And one little thing before we go, I want to give you a quick preview of another special event that Ascidian Therapeutics and the Carroll Center are working on this fall. On World Sight Day, which is Thursday, October 9th, we will host What's Next in Your Journey Through Vision Loss. It's an afternoon event at the Carroll Center campus in Newton, Massachusetts, and it will be focused on engaging, empowering, and elevating individuals living with vision loss. So everything from navigating new diagnosis and exploring treatment options to tapping into supportive services and hearing from our inspiring keynote speaker, Hava Fleissner, who is Miss Teen USA 2024, as well as an individual living with Stargardt. So it's definitely an afternoon you don't want to miss. And it will also include a networking reception and interactive demos in assistive technology, low vision tools, daily living skills, and products from the Carroll store. So please keep an eye on your inbox. We'll be opening registration this summer and hope that many of you can attend that event in person. So thank you again for everyone to participating today, and we look forward to staying in touch. Appreciate it. Thank you.